Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. One of, if not the most common questions I receive from individuals who have been in the psychedelic space for some time now is how to know when you need a break from the medicines to integrate. The challenge with this is that ultimately the answer is going to be different from person to person. However, there are some telltale signs to look out for, along with a roadmap of how to understand when you are ready and have the necessary bandwidth to go back to the medicine. This is why in today's episode, I invited my dear brother and business partner, who has taken the last year off of all medicines to integrate to a deeper degree, to come onto the show and share why he decided to take the break, how the break has been, what it has opened up for him, and his thoughts surrounding what these periods of integration are truly for within the big picture of life. For those of you out there who are committed to leveling up and consciously connecting with medicines, trust me when I say that this is one episode that you're not going to want to miss. So, without further ado, please help me in welcoming my man, Alex Morningstar, to the show. Alex Morningstar, my man, we are back again. It's been quite a while, dude, since you've graced our presence on This One Time on Psychedelics. And guys, for everyone listening, like I said in the intro, I was talking to Al recently. I was like, dude, you got to get back on here, bro. So I'm excited to dive in with you, man. There's so many things we're going to be traversing in this hour we have together. We could do 5 hours if we wanted to do. Guys, you know, for those that don't know, I already said it in the intro too, but Alex is my business partner in Highly Optimized. So I get to spend a lot of time with this cool cat, and we have a friggin' blast. So Al, dude, I know since the last time you've been on, it's been a while, dude. I think it's been over a year. And during that time, you've taken a big break from, you know, not just cannabis, but kind of all psychedelics, right? To get some integration time, you know, get some time away. And we talk about that often on the show. And I'd love if you could give us just a little update, man. What's been going on in your world? Maybe what led to this break, and then we'll take it from there.
Ryan, it's so great to be here. Let's traverse. We traverse often.
Yeah, dude.
Traversing activated. Right here. Yeah, so as you prefaced, I have been on a psychedelics hiatus for about a year now. And this is a topic I love to talk about. So for me, when my bandwidth expands a lot, that's a great time for me to then start to accommodate that expansion. So about a year ago, I had a series of experiences where my bandwidth expanded. I got some great insights, some great downloads, and saw a lot of challenging experiences as well through the psychedelic exploration zone. And to me, that was a cue to really, this is going to sound, everybody says this, but it was one of the strongest messages I've had before about, all right, time to integrate all of this, time to bring it in, time to organize and consolidate some concepts and ideas that I've learned. And so the short answer is I just felt like it was time to do some integrating and take a lot of those experiences that I had that were super potent, super powerful, start bringing them into my day-to-day reality. Some people describe that as spiritualizing the body. I've sort of conceived of this process as that, or the process of actualizing the things that I had experienced and I'm using the word seen. Everybody listening kind of knows what I mean, you know, experienced, seen. And I had that message. Hey, you know, listen to this stuff, explore this stuff. A lot of it was so large and potent for my little mortal mind that it's taken time to make sense of some of the messages, some of the energies. And it's actually been a great journey, just kind of bringing that in and, as they say, integrating it. You know what I'm saying?
I love that, man, because yeah, dude, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And I mean, dude, this is the entire fucking image, right? Like this is, to me anyway, I'll make it about me, not to project on anyone else listening, but for me, this is literally the entire reason I connect with psychedelics, right? I don't just connect with psychedelics to explore realms, just for like no intention, right? I'm there to have my entire life benefit. And, when you're always in that realm, it's hard to actually make sense out of what your normal realm is versus that altered state or altered realm world that you've entered, And so for me, whether it's cannabis, whether it's psilocybin, et cetera, I like taking these extended breaks so that I can actually come back to normalcy, right? I can come back and let the pendulum swing the complete opposite way, the opposite pole, right? To be sobriety, and then find my way back to the middle in time, right? Where then I'm like, okay, like how much bandwidth do I have back now, right? Like, do I feel like I've made those discoveries or those ideas part of my everyday life? And if so, okay, cool. Now the question becomes, do I have the bandwidth to go back under the knife, as they say, right? And do some psychological repairing, right? Because, these things, these patterns, these programs, yes, there can be spontaneous healing, right? That can definitely happen. I've had definite experiences of that in my life, especially in 2019 when I had that MDMA experience. There was something that shifted immediately within me. But even then, it took time to figure out well, what is this shift? How does it show up? How do I show up differently now in my reality as a result of this shift? And how can I take this shift and actually do something amazing with it in the world that I live in every day? And so what I love that you're articulating here is this time period where you were exploring, you were fucking around and finding out, right? You were hitting buttons and seeing what happened. And then you realized, okay, I've hit a lot of buttons. I've now had certain responses from these buttons, and these responses I'm getting are now too large to dive into while I'm still altering my consciousness. I need to normalize these things. And I'd be curious to hear from you, what were some of these signs for you, right? Was it intuition, just an intuitive sense that yeah, right now I'm full up? Were there any physical sensations? Because this is what I get asked a lot from people is how do you know when enough is enough? And so for you, how did you know that you were ready for a break?
Yeah. And I love what you're sharing here about, the being in the pocket with the exploration versus, bringing that stuff home with you. I'll answer this in a couple ways. So first, I think this concept coming through for me, and we talk about cannabis a lot with a lot of people, right? And a very low level kind of gentle experience that I can describe is I had this one session where I sat with cannabis and I went into my shower and was just, and I'm, me, Ryan, I'm a sensitive dude, and I don't mean I'm soft because I have a hard side to me, but I pick up on a lot just by my nature. And so I had a very mild sitting with cannabis. I went into the shower and I had this just absolutely beautiful experience where I was thinking about my partner, Jody, and I just experienced and saw the most deep red crimson heart. It was this color that I can never see in my normal waking. I was like, is that what red really looks like? Oh my God. And I had this knowing oh, I get this. I can have Jody with me anytime I choose. My heart's able to do this through this quantum situation. And cannabis was kind of helping me see oh, your loved ones are always with you. And the more you tune into this frequency, the more you're able to access that. So that was a very positive experience. That the lesson I got from that is I want to practice doing this, because a lot of people we talk with, they're like, man, I kind of need cannabis to get loose. I need cannabis to connect with people and feel funny or artistic or creative. And after I had that one, I was like, you know what? I've been really learning from cannabis a lot for the last few years. I want to see if I can do this thing that just happened in a sober state, or what can you really call sober technically, but without interacting with cannabis for a while. And that was really the positive, love orienting message that I received a little over a year ago. And since then I've been practicing all right, I'm going to do that heart thing straight up with people. So I started practicing more and more my ability to feel into my heart center and just feel this immense unification, love, communication through my heart. I'll also share, because there's the dark side of this time period. I had another situation in which I had a very challenging, as you and I like to say, also could be said fucking scary, journey in which I was confronted with both seen entities, but also felt energies of guilt, shame, feeling lost, just a lot of those types of energies that are sometimes hard to articulate. But when you're in the medicine space, you're like, I get this metaphor. I see this. I'm learning more about reality right now. And so in the span of a week, I got to have both that light and that dark. The light side going, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is available. This is so beautiful. And also, hey, come on through to the shadow side, kid, and get challenged. And that experience rocked me. And those are two experiences specifically that I can point to, where on the light side, I was like, I want to practice tuning into this. And on the dark side, I basically said, yes, sir, that was plenty. Give me some time to go back to the workshop and figure out what that was that I just felt. I didn't want it to be just as like, well, that was fucking scary and move on with my life. I wanted to go, what was that? What is inside of me that exists? What parts of me are expressing in that way? And it's been a really introspective and beautiful journey to actually excavate within and go, explore both the dark and the light inside of me, and try to really make sense of it in a way that is functional, that I can I get what that was now, and I'm going to do something with that. So yeah, those are a couple of experiences that come to mind.
Yeah, that makes sense, because, we get hit up a lot by people that are talking about similar types of experiences, right? Very challenging experiences, right? Like the light side, yes, that's definitely something that we hear about too, but typically it's people hitting us up saying very similar things, right? Like having periods of depersonalization, having, a little bit of paranoid type thoughts go on, things of that nature. And I think that I say we, but as a society, we've learned that if something is not working right, you must add something to it to make it better, right? Like if you have a headache, you got to add something to that called an Advil or an aspirin, etc., to make that better. You have a stomachache, you got to add something like Pepto-Bismol to make it better. Even in the sense of, mental health, right? If your mental health is, off, you need to add something like therapy or coaching to it. And I'm not saying that's a bad move. I'm just saying we've been trained to think that any problem requires an addition to remediate, right? And so what you're articulating here is actually a subtraction process, right? It's actually a taking away of the unnecessary. And not to say that cannabis could be necessary or unnecessary, but through discernment, you were recognizing in that moment and being honest with yourself and saying that right now, this addition of more of this thing that's going to disintegrate my reality, I've reached my comfort zone of disintegration. Now it's time to actually subtract and have everything come back together, right? Have the metaphorical snow globe that gets shaken up when we go on these crazy psychedelic experiences, actually allow it to settle. Because again, when I know for me, when I first got into psychedelic medicines, I thought the entire point was to shake the snow globe up as furiously and fast as possible, right? That's what was fun to me, just like a child will, right? But as you get into adulthood, you start realizing that the real beauty of a snow globe is when it's settling and you can actually see the image within it. And so I think that as we continue getting into psychedelics and we get a little bit older and we start really understanding what these medicines have truly been here for millennia, we actually start getting excited over the process of subtraction, because we know that the same way that, yes, that expansion process of blowing open what you think is possible for you is super stimulating and can be really enjoyable, can be really scary too. But over time, that more passive process of having everything come together can be just as stimulating, right? Because, tapping deeper into your routines, creating structure around those awarenesses or ideas to allow them to continue to have a ripple effect throughout your entire life, and look what it's become, man. Look at, what you've been able to create in your inner world over this past year. You and I talk very intimately and deeply about our internal states and things like that. And I know for you, there's been many things of, what taking this break from not just cannabis, but all psychedelics has done for you. From me looking in, and this has been very similar to me this past year, it feels as though you've been able to really feel stronger in your masculine energy, and that's something that's been really big for me this year too, right? Like getting more structure, when it comes to the finance stuff we're learning and all the sovereignty stuff, and all this stuff is really exciting, it's like really fun stuff. But when you're constantly disintegrating yourself, it's really hard to actually focus on something, especially something as big as like financial literacy, sovereignty, these realms. For any of you guys that heard the Brandon Jill Williams episode, if you've downloaded this course, you know just how crazy big that realm is, let alone entrepreneurship, let alone having a family like you do, let alone having hobbies, right? Like all of these things take a lot of mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth. And when you're constantly stretching your comfort zone, you don't really have time for it to assimilate and integrate. So yeah, I feel this wholeheartedly, man. It's pretty wild stuff. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and to look at getting out of your comfort zone as a concept in plant medicines and how that relates, like for me, I've come to perceive plant medicines as teachers. I know a lot of people listening see it like that. There's no new news here, everybody. But
Yeah.
but really, when I think about what that means, it's like I've come to see, like, when I was doing jujitsu training, you'd go to a workshop, right? And the teacher would teach you like 10 wild ass moves that you've never seen. And, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go practice these wild ass moves for a while. I don't then go, hey, show me 10 more of those. Hey, show me 10 more of those. Hey, show me, how about 10 more of those? Now I've got 50 wild ass. Where I'm at is I'm like, I want to learn. I want to see these things that the plants have to show me, and then I want to go practice them and figure them out. I don't need more exposure than my system can integrate, because I want to actually play. I want to actually use it. And speaking of comfort zones again, I've definitely reached some out there comfort zone realms in this department. But what's more uncomfortable than actually living your life? And that was the other big lesson I've been working with, is like, the plant medicine journeys are super potent, super beautiful, super challenging, all the things. And what I think a lot of people, whether, like you said, it's mental health, entrepreneurship, trying to have better relationships, kind of the scariest and biggest trip of all is just being with what is. Just figuring out life, figuring out business, figuring out relationships, waking up, especially as your awareness starts to expand about how the world works. You're like, well, didn't see it like that before. I guess I have to live life knowing that that's out there, or at least my perception of life is telling me that that's out there. So, I don't view it necessarily as like, oh, I'm like Piglet and Winnie the Pooh, and that got a little too scary for me. It's more like, wow, okay, deep message. Gonna go ahead and start practicing that. And now that I see a little bit more than I saw before, I gotta, now day-to-day life has to accommodate that. And I really am a believer that the more good and beautiful you're able to see is in relationship to the more challenge and dark that you can see. And that for me is when you get into the really paradoxical, technical, challenging mental work of like, wait, but how does that work? And I thought enlightenment was supposed to be fucking cool and easy. And then wait, I thought good was this and bad was this, and the lines start to get blurry. And for me, it's actually plenty psychedelic to wake up and live a normal human reality, especially when your doors of perception start to be a little bit more open and you can see things from many angles. You can feel people's energy more. You can kind of see behind the veil of a lot of things that you couldn't see before. So yeah, just echoing some of the things you said, I really do look at it as I do want to gain more knowledge. I do have this kind of propensity toward like wanting to know more, and that's interesting to me. I want to do good in the world also. And it's almost like it's just like in jiu-jitsu, the more things you learn, now you have like more to balance and integrate. Now instead of 5 moves to worry about, I've got 30 moves to worry about. And it gets bigger and bigger, and with that your nervous system has to grow in its capacity. Your mental bandwidth has to accommodate. You have to somehow figure out how you're going to live your life, incorporating all these things. So it's, people talk about Tantra, Kundalini, plant medicines, spirituality. The ones who get it, the people I look up to as like, all right, I'm going to listen to that person, right? Like people who get it, they let you know like, hey, this, it's not a cakewalk. There's some interesting stuff that comes. There's a reason we have systems around these things. So yeah, definitely a lot of learning this last year.
Well, dude, it's 2 analogies came to me. I'll do the second one first, but the second one was it's kind of like spicy food, right? Like, spicy food is something that if you're not used to spicy food, you're like, why would anyone do that? But the more you get used to it, the more you become comfortable in that pain, because it's still pain, right? It's not like you don't feel the spice, but you start to normalize and accept and be excited about that pain being part of the experience, and it's very similar to exercise as well, right? Like the first time I ever decided to exercise, I maybe made it about 10 minutes and I was like, why would anyone do this? But then I started to learn more about it and continue going back. And then after a while, it was like, well, I don't even want to work out if I'm not going to feel a really big burn, And the other part too that goes along with the jiu-jitsu analogy here is that what also changes when you start jiu-jitsu versus when you become like a black belt is that when you start jiu-jitsu, you're either there because you're typically wanting a hobby, but there might be part of you that's like, well, I'm going to beat someone up if I need to beat them up, right? Like I'm going to protect my own, I want to be able to handle myself. But what do you start learning when you go to jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or any of these things? You start being more and more respectful of the skills you have with regards to them really being able to hurt someone. And so even in a situation where someone is maybe being confronting to you, you're going to try to diffuse that situation, right? But you have to learn that over time, right? Like the more skills you have, the more you have to be really aware and present and disciplined with those skills. And it's very similar to psychedelics. It's like, even though I've been connecting with psychedelics for just about 10 years now, I do them much less frequently than I ever have. And it's because now that I've gained so much more awareness, not just through psychedelics, but mostly through taking action on the breadcrumb trails that those psychedelics have led me. Now I have to be really aware of like, hey, for instance, like, am I going to be connecting with a medicine that's going to put me out for a couple of days and not allow me to show up and do my important work in the world? Because if so, I have to be discerning enough to go, no, that's not the right time to do that, right? I also have to be discerning enough to make sure that I make time for myself at a certain point when it does feel like the call is hitting me, right? And I'm aware of like how much time it's really going to take to not just go through the ceremony. That's the time that most people allot for. But how much time is it going to take for me to come back and start to at least make a plan of what to do from that awareness to move forward with, And so it's almost like the more power you start unlocking with psychedelics, the greater responsibility is needed and necessary for you to continue balancing them into your life in a healthy way. Because it's almost like this too. It's like when you start playing a video game and you're going around and you're looting things. I'm playing Starfield right now because it's wintertime and I play video games for a couple of months a year. Yeah. And so like when you first start looting, you might be finding 50 credits in a treasure chest and you think that's amazing. Well, as you keep leveling up, it might be very normal for you to find now 1,000 credits and that's normalized, right? But at the same time, right, like, it's not that 1,000 credits isn't more than 50. It is, but now it's more normalized, right? So like the amount that you're going to be able to purchase with those 1,000 credits is going to be a lot more than say 50, right? Hopefully that analogy makes sense. But the whole idea here to make sense of this is that the more aware you are going into a psychedelic experience, the more that you have the potential of discovering. And the more you discover, the longer it takes to integrate. And so in the beginning, I was hitting buttons a lot because I wasn't that aware. And so even like the smallest thing would be like, whoa, that's really cool, right? And arguably, they would still take a long time. I just didn't know that yet. But now that I've integrated so much into my reality, I'm very aware of what hitting that button is going to do. It's like, okay, that's going to completely open up everything in my subconscious, right? I'm then going to have to look at that stuff. I'm going to have to make peace with certain things that maybe are going to take a long time to make peace with. And then I also have all my stuff I'm doing every week. Can I do both those things right now? Probably not. That's why for the last, 8-9 months since February, I haven't connected with really anything except maybe a small dose of psilocybin once at Electric Forest and cannabis, and the main reason for that is because anything else, MDMA wouldn't really give me that. I connected with that once too at Electric Forest, but it's like, anything else is going to open up too much from my current bandwidth. And so I totally feel you on this. Like, integration, it's turning traits into states, right? Or states into traits rather. And so like when you're turning a state into a trait, it takes a process, right? It takes like a time of actually figuring out what that state is, what use it is to you in your life, right? Like if you actually like this thing that was shown to you, if you want to explore it deeper, and then what's the missing piece between how I was able to experience it then, but I'm not now. Why? And that takes a lot of self-discovery, right? And a lot of, intuitive inquisition and a lot of, just curiosity. Because if you don't have that, you're just going to leave a lot on the table and go to the next ceremony and the next ceremony and the next ceremony. And what will end up happening is very similar to your jiu-jitsu analogy. It's like if you went to a jiu-jitsu coach and asked him or her to show you a series of moves and they showed you, and the next time you came, and they were like, all right, you ready to build on that? You were like, nah, just show me the same 10 again. They might do it once without saying anything. But like the second or third time, they'd be like, hey, is this Groundhog Day? Like, I already taught you these, right? And you're like, yeah, well, I don't know. I just decided to show up and ask you again. I didn't practice at all. They're like, okay, what are you really paying me for, right? Like they're going to be kind of confused. And so why is it different when it comes to plant teachers, right? Like they will show you the same thing over and over again. Is that what they want? I don't know. I can't speak for them, but I would imagine it's not that fun for them to just show you the same thing over and over again. And I can imagine it's not fun for the person in that situation. Maybe someone listening resonates with this. I did at one point to keep getting shown the same things over and over again, so it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned getting into fitness before, and I wanted to kind of share a framework I like to look at. So if we're talking about internal work or whatever, however people define this work, right? I thought of this progression. So fitness, you start out and you're like, oh, shit, I'm sweaty. Some people don't like sore. I've been working out a long time, so I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. Then people, you start doing myofascial release maybe, and people are like, fuck, this fucking hurts. But also it's kind of blissful, like, and you get that pain pleasure balance, right? And you're releasing tension in your fascia, and you're kind of matching frequency with the tension in your fascia, and you're kind of working on like, oh, I didn't realize I was carrying that tension. And then if you take this metaphor and you just keep going deeper and deeper, then you get like into somatic experiencing. It's like, okay, I've felt working out, I've felt the lacrosse ball on my fascia. Now I'm going to feel my feelings? Oh shit. Ow, that really fucking hurts. Oh, my grief. Jesus. Right. And then if you go deeper, it gets pretty deep when you get into deep forms of meditation, deep forms of trance, or deep forms of plant medicine work. And I really do think it's good to sort of build your skill set to navigate in that realm and recognize that there is this kind of training progression that can be walked, like a path of progression you can walk to build your capacity to know what's going on. And I loved what you shared about, showing up to the teacher and saying the same, like, show me those again, show me those again. I kind of wanted to share a couple examples, because if somebody's maybe new to this whole concept, it's like, okay, I hear everybody say integration. The teachers are showing me things. So what am I supposed to go do then? Like I saw a freaking, like imagine what you might see, right? Like I saw a fucking whatever, a tree that came to life and it had a freaking violin, and it was, what do I make of that? But I can think of a few really solid examples that I wanted to share real quick. So I shared the heart consciousness meditation. So what would I do to like practice that then before coming back to the teacher? Okay, well, whenever I'm around my loved ones, I'm going to like stop my monkey mind. I'm going to slow down and I'm going to go, wait, am I like actually attuned and feeling this person? I'm going to see if I can feel in my body that love, like actually feel it like I do if I'm on plant medicines. I've done fitness, I've done the lacrosse ball, I've felt my feelings a little bit. Now I'm right here live. It's an action moment. Can I do this? That to me is like an example of trying to practice what I was shown. And then what do I make of seeing a demon that says guilt or you're not supposed to be alive? Okay, that's some sort of shadow. And then, over the year, you start to go, oh, those are my yucky feelings. Oh, I see those yucky feelings happening. And oh, I'm starting to like when those yucky feelings exist, they're moving from the unconscious to me actually being able to see them. And so when we talk about like awareness or shining a light into the dark, I'm learning the skill set of seeing these metaphors that are presented to me and starting to understand them. And this goes into dream analysis and kind of the Jungian approach to like bringing the subconscious into the conscious. And so one other example I wanted to share, this one's one that's kind of newer that I'm working on, but we're at this great hot springs resort and we're like, hey, should we eat a little mushrooms? And it's like nighttime, the stars are out, there's hot spring pools everywhere. I'm like, okay, I actually ate a little mushrooms, even though I've been taking a long break. I was like, all right, I want a really light dose, right? Even on a light dose, I started to have quite a powerful experience. And I was like, all right, I'm going into this tub and I'm just going to lay here because I could feel it coming on. I was like, are you guys set? All right, I want to know, is everybody okay? There's where our tent is. If anybody needs to go back, I'm going into this tub and I'm not going to be out for a while. So I lay in the tub and I just like, I see like these energies peeling the fascia, this energetic fascia of my neck starting to open up, and it's like you're just an avatar. I'm like, okay, interesting details, thank you. Whatever. Moving on, and then the real depth was like I went inside, and I was confronted with this wild version of myself. I was like Wild Alex, and he was like hiding in the jungle. And he was like super like fierce and powerful, but also kind of bewildered. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing here? Kind of thing. Right. So it's like these certain journeys, I'm able to go, oh, that heart thing. I think I know how to work on that. And then with the wild man, I called him. I was like, okay, what is the wild man trying to tell me? Where in my life does the wild man does he need more love from me? Because he seemed kind of bewildered. But also he's like, is he like, let me out? Like, let me at him. And I'm like, oh, what does he want to, like, what does the wild man want to do? And so I've started to really look at it sort of like dream analysis, where people would be like, well, what use is analyzing your dreams? And Carl Jung, as I mentioned, he's like, oh, yeah, start to bring those subconscious, unconscious metaphors into your waking state and see what's there. And that is my perception of how do we, okay, we were shown stuff, we felt stuff, how do we learn and practice it? And I think it really ties into psychology principles, spirituality principles, plant medicine principles. And that's my perception of, what am I trying to do when I get the message? It's like I'm trying to use my creative human abilities to make sense of whatever that was that communicated to me in that strange way. And it's not always like, you should sell all your possessions and move to Spain and become a motorcycle tour guide. Like, it's not always that clear. Yeah. I got this wild man. So I'm like, okay, when I meditate in the morning, I'm going to say, check in with the wild man, go, what should we do today? Is there something we got to do? And I don't always know. Like that's to go back to our first topic. That's when I try to slow down and I'm like, that was a really deep message. Like I could feel the power of it, but I don't fully understand it yet. So what do I need to do to build my understanding of what that was? And sometimes it's a little much, like what you see is like, I just don't even know how to relate with that. So whatever, but yeah, back to you.
No, I mean, dude, I love that, man, because that's a great expose of exactly how I found this stuff to work too. And, it's very similar with parts work, right? Like this is essentially what parts work is. It's like looking at ourselves as a collection of many parts, and each one of these parts having a specific message for us, a specific purpose in our life. And throughout our lives, it's not like we ever consciously thought like, I'm going to think that some of my parts are bad, but like through society, through a lot of programming and patterning, which is unconscious, right? A lot of it happens through media. A lot of it happens through our parents. And again, no one here is the bad guy necessarily, right? I don't like to view reality that way. Like there's someone trying to program me, right? Like, you may have belief systems around what's going on in the world. I would just rather not think they're out to get me, because that then creates victimhood in me. So rather, I think of them as challenges, right? Challenges and opportunities for me to continue choosing myself and loving myself, even in the place of what other people tell me may be right for me. Because I truly believe that the entire point of our lives is to be willing to disappoint anyone and everyone in place of ever disappointing ourselves. And so I see these, potential patterns, programming, things like that as great opportunities to be able to show us ourselves unapologetically, right? And be able to allow us to choose ourselves. And so when these types of things occur, right, what ends up happening is we end up thinking that a lot of these parts of us are bad, right? So maybe you learned as a man, right? For maybe many men listening, they can relate to this. Maybe you learned that crying was for women, right? Or any of these silly, outdated belief systems. And you may even now know that that's bullshit, but yet somehow it's not translating. Intellectually, you know it, but you haven't embodied it yet because you're still not able to express emotion without feeling a anxiety or a block or etc., right? So then in addition to that, maybe you found that certain parts of you are really good. So maybe when you're the agreeable people pleaser, you've had positive reinforcement that that part of you is going to allow you to be accepted by the tribe to a deeper degree, right? Maybe your parents, when you were younger, said that a good boy or girl just says yes, and I understand, or whatever, right? And so you learned that the way in which to be liked in the world by yourself and others is to be agreeable. But now you're starting to realize that you're having this challenge, right, in a psychedelic experience because your soul's clicking in and being like, dude, what are you doing up there? We don't care what these people think of us necessarily. Like, we want to love ourselves. And now you're having these other parts that are like, no, because that's not going to make you safe, right? And so like you can have these warring parts inside of you that want the same thing, but they're going about it in very different ways. And so now picture the average person having no awareness on this stuff, taking 5 grams of mushrooms and having a bunch of shit hit them, and then the next weekend deciding to go do an LSD experience or whatever, right? And this is, again, no judgment. It's just based on the fact of like, I would imagine that person would go originally to mushrooms because they're feeling some sort of something, right? They're wanting something from it. They're either bored or they're lacking insert thing here, right? They're going there for a reason. They're not simply going there to like fuck around and find out, right? They're going there for something. Otherwise, they'd be going to alcohol if they just wanted to get fucked up, right? So they're going to a psychedelic, whether it's conscious or unconscious, because they're looking for something. They then get shown a whole lot of something. And then because they've never learned about integration or any of these things, they just come back and go, whoa, whatever I experienced maybe was amazing. And I don't experience a lot of amazing. So I'm going to go do a lot more of that. Or I realized that whatever I experienced was terrifying, and now I'm going to be the one voting no on ballots, if we think votes really matter. But that's another conversation. I'm going to be the one putting no on a ballot because psychedelics are stupid and they're dangerous, right? When in reality, it wasn't the medicine. It was just the actions someone took with them that they didn't take accountability on were unconscious, And so this is a lot of like what I started the show for, right? Where we talk about literally, these are our conversations all day, every day, peeps, right? Because no medicine has this done more to it than cannabis, because cannabis is so normalized. For a lot of people, when your tolerance gets built up, you really can't feel the subtle layers of cannabis. And so like, it's much easier to numb out than it is with mushrooms or LSD or something like that. But that being said, I do see it running rampant, especially with ayahuasca. Ayahuasca seems like something where people are really like excited and prideful to tell you how many ceremonies they've sat in. And again, this is not a judgment or anything, but for me, I've had to learn throughout my own journey of this exact thing that it's not really the amount of ceremonies that dictate self-awareness, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. It's actually what you talked about. It's like, how well can you live in your day-to-day life with no filters, with no vices, etc. Like, how well can you show up when you come home after a long day and your partner has a challenge with you because you left dishes out, right? Like, how well can you wake up and let the dog out in the morning? How well can you respond to your kids when they're screaming, right? Do you lose your temper with them, or do you actually take a breath and center in and remember that experience where you had to breathe through and tell yourself that everything is love, and you breathe through it and you're able to hold that space? These are, in my opinion anyway, the very challenging aspects of life that psychedelics are actually meant to help you with, because when you go into the cave you fear most to enter, you can find the treasure you seek most, right? As Joseph Campbell states. And so that to me is the real treasure. It's, can I keep my equilibrium? Can I keep myself in a state of peace? And more than even that, can I realize that I create my own reality? Can I take on the great responsibility that comes with the great power of understanding that I and I alone create my reality? That even Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning speaks about the one thing that no one can take away from you is your attitude towards life. And that to a lot of people is super triggering, because they don't want to victimize themselves, but they don't want to accept the fact that if a loved one dies and it ruins their life, that it wasn't the loved one dying that ruined their life. It was their reaction to it. And this is coming from someone who's dealt with this in family members and lost plenty of people and everything like that. So I don't say this without compassion, but it's just, if we truly want to be the leaders the world is patiently awaiting for, we can't be victimizing ourselves and blaming external circumstances for how we feel, how we show up the way we show up, etc. So yeah, it's multifaceted for sure, but yeah, it's wild, man.
Yeah. And you're touching on a few things that I just love, the martial arts journey framework. So I'm going to lean on that metaphor again for a second. But you mentioned the voting no on the ballot if you have a hard time, or you mentioned a lot of beautiful stuff right there. But it's like when you go to the dojo, you have an instructor that's going to help you. You have safe training partners. You have a safe environment to train in, and there's a progression that happens. And when it comes to plant medicines, I'm not here to tell anybody like you can't wrestle in the backyard, but it helps to be at the dojo if you have a specific style of progression you want to go on, right? And so, when it comes to plant medicine work, I just think it's a very foreign topic for a lot of people in my culture in the United States. It's definitely been around, but still like a really deep understanding of what's going on there it's still pretty obscure, I think, for most people, even people that are somewhat experienced. And there's this metaphor in jiu-jitsu and martial arts, and if you've ever seen that movie Hero with Jet Li, it's the spiral concept. But in this case, what he describes is the beginner starts and you get pretty advanced and you start getting into these pretty technical moves. But then as you become more advanced, you circle back around to the fundamentals again. And so the black belt and the white belt are doing the same things, but the black belt is doing them in a whole different way. And when it comes to working with plant medicines and spirituality in general, what I've learned as a humble student who's gotten my ass handed to me both in martial arts and in spirituality, you start to learn, like, first of all, I had no idea that all this was here. No one gave me a map. I had no idea what this is. So in my journey where I thought I was pretty fancy, that's when you really get your ass handed to you. Like if you think you're a fancy purple belt in the gym and a real, badass is just like, nope, you're not shit. Like train for 20 more years, bro. I've had those experiences where you think you're getting pretty fancy. You get knocked down a peg or two and you get humble and you go back to like, okay, I'm going to go back to the fundamentals. And something that's intriguing to me about the healing space, the spiritual space, the plant medicine space, I realize this about myself, so I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I did not grow up understanding what psychology even was. And I have a lot of experience in training people physically, and people don't know how their bodies work. So we don't know really how our bodies work. We don't know how to fix back pain. We don't know how our brain works. People are not aware that there could be different parts or voices to be experienced. And it's pretty crazy that we're all moving through life trying to figure out who we are. And somehow, as a culture, like our parents, our schools, our mentors, like you think that just like martial arts, they'd be like, okay, here's what a jab is, here's what a cross is, here's a front kick, here's a round kick. And you'd start to be like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to do this. When it comes to psychology and spirituality, people don't even know what game they're playing. People haven't even heard the basic terms before, or why is my relationship the way it is? Why do I react this way? And so you're like a complete, you're disconnected from the game you're playing. But then people want to fuel that with plant medicines and go, here, why don't you just amplify? That's like a white belt going, I'm going to go to the world championship and fight the heavyweight. I'm going to go fight Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson's like going to pound you. So that's like, that's something I really appreciate about the work that you've been advocating for, Ryan, and my path as well. It's like, hey, instead of just like a crapshoot where we have no idea what we're doing and we're just fucking sending it, what if we start to spread awareness around the fundamentals? Like, what is your nervous system and what role does that play in your bandwidth? What is parts work? What is dream analysis? What are the attachment styles? What does childhood trauma do? What's that all about? And I think if people had more of a map to even understand psychology to begin with, now when you go into these different realms and spaces, you'd have some context to even interpret what's going on. So, that's what came up for me when your last share there. It's like, yeah, people don't have a map to work from. They don't have context. And it seems like nowadays everyone's running around going, oh my God, I'm depressed. I'm neurodivergent. My life is terrible. I have gut health issues. My back, like, it seems like so many people are falling apart and everybody's kind of clamoring for, how do I fix this? And going back to your concept of subtraction, a lot of times it's like, hey, if we had a little bit better view of what was going on, a lot of this could be solved or addressed in a much more low invasive way, but we just don't know what's going on.
At the end of the day, right? Like, when you think about it also, right, not only did we not learn anything about psychology, not only did we not learn anything about spirituality, for most of us anyway, right? Maybe we were raised in a deep religion, which is another whole level of programming that we need to deprogram ourselves from. Our good buddy Aaron Abke knows a lot about that. But at the same time, right, like, we really didn't learn anything about health, about sex, about, purpose, and like doing what really you love in life. Like, I don't know if this is the same for you, and I'd be curious to, hear on my Instagram from any of you guys that listen to this. But, for me, like, I grew up literally basically being told, not maybe straight up, but being influenced to think that throughout life, you're going to school, and the whole idea is you better not become an artist because you're not going to make shit for money if you're an artist. Like, that's like a lot of the movies I was seeing is like the struggling artist, aka like the person that did something they loved. The archetype for that was always the artist for me, right? Like, that was always the depiction in movies, and also like, what my parents told me and everything, where it wasn't that like you couldn't make money, but it was more like, if you choose to do what you love, good fucking luck in this world, right? Like, that was kind of the belief that got put into me. And so when I got older, my mind works in a way where I was always able to figure out like what was the minimum effective dose of being able to do what the world wanted of me. Like, when I had to study for a test, it was like, I know I can get this done in 2 hours. I'm not spending the week doing this because I don't want to do it. So I was able to kind of skate my way around it. But what ended up happening is eventually I started to realize, like, I can't skate my way around this anymore. Like, I don't want to work for anyone else. I don't want to be a part of the system. I don't want any of this stuff. And so on the other side of that, or, in addition to that, I was also starting to figure out, like, holy shit, our health is completely backwards. Holy shit, school systems were not invented to actually train us to be really well-rounded and amazing individuals that could follow their heart. It was to create factory workers. Holy shit, even though modern medicine does some amazing things, treating modern medicine like healthcare is ridiculous. It's sick care, and sometimes sick care is necessary. I'm not knocking it, but like, to call that healthcare is so crazy. So I'm like starting to realize all of these things, and then I'm trying to throw psychedelics into that, right? So like, talk about disintegration, right? And I think for a lot of people listening to this show, you're probably pretty similar, right? You maybe fall asleep to listen to conspiracy theories and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I love conspiracy theories. I love diving into alternative theories. I don't even like calling them conspiracy theories, but recognize that anytime you're doing that, that's kind of a psychedelic experience too, right? Like, I'm not a flat earther, but like when I've heard people explain flat earth, that's kind of like me taking a psychedelic. I'm like, okay, so you're telling me in your world, the earth is completely flat, etc. And I'm not saying I don't believe it. I'm just saying as an example, it's one of those things where I'm like, whoa, okay. So like for a lot of us that get into psychedelics, it's not like we were like a Republican that was, paying their taxes and wearing khakis and then decided to eat 5 grams of mushrooms. That's not normally how that happens. It's normally like a series of questioning, starting to question a lot of things, have some breakdowns that maybe lead to some breakthroughs. But then at a certain point, you have this grandiose experience, and then you don't really know what to make of all of it after, And that's where I'm so grateful for what we do, because we are supplying that component of not even necessarily integration, but just support, man. Like, a lot of times, like, the way that we view our clients, and, we've talked about this at length, is that they are the expert of themselves, right? Like, we're not there to tell them who they are. We're not there to tell them what an experience means for them. We're there to just simply be an ear, understanding and believing that when they're able to express, right, and have people hold space, that they're going to be able to figure out what that information means to them. And then from there, the best thing we can do is support them in making sure they're not falling short of that goal that they told us matters to them. And so when you start to view it that way, it takes this whole process that otherwise can be really, really confusing of like, what even is integration, right? Like, you go online, there's like 80 million different integration techniques. There's 80 million different views on integration. That's why I said a while ago, I think of integration as just turning states into traits. And I think the easiest way to do that is, how have human beings done it for a long time? Well, they would connect with the medicine in a tribe. They would all sit around the fire after and debrief, and they would support each other. Then they would go through those transformations as a result, And so I think that keeping it as simple as possible while keeping it profound as possible and powerful as possible with holding that space is a simple way for anyone listening who wants to, really be able to take action on this, even if you just have a friend near you, or you have a significant other, or you have parents that are open and listening to any of this stuff. It doesn't even have to be with psychedelics. Like, think about the things that are challenging you right now in your life, and go speak to someone about that. It doesn't even need to be necessarily a therapist. Obviously those people are great. Obviously working with coaches is great. But for a lot of you guys, maybe you can't afford that. Maybe you're not ready for that. Maybe that feels too scary. Like, reach out and talk to someone about it. Because when you start speaking about these things, you'll start all of a sudden getting the ideas of like, oh, I know how I would do that. And then it just becomes like, well, are you good at holding yourself accountable? Or do you really benefit from having someone else hold you accountable? I know for me, like in our business, we're doing this for each other all the time. We're not saying like, I'm going to hold you accountable to that, Al. But like every week we're coming to things like, okay, that's what you're going to do this week. Okay, that's what you're going to do. And because I know that you're depending on me, Phil's depending on me, the community's depending on me, I'm good, right? Like, I know I'm going to get that done. If it was just me, right? Like, sometimes for my own things, I'll have Rachel like, hey, can you hold me accountable to this week? Because I know it's probably going to be something that maybe is a little challenging, that I could kind of, my brain could finagle its way around to make it seem like it's a good idea to do it, even though I didn't want to do it. And so sometimes I'll bring someone else in on it and use my ego, because my ego does not want to be proved wrong. So if I tell someone else and then they start seeing me do this thing, they're like, well, wait a minute, I thought you weren't going to do that. My ego will not let that happen. And so there are ways that when you start becoming aware enough of like, yes, the challenge with the ego is sometimes it can be like overly competitive, et cetera, especially as an Aries. But when you start to actually understand like, well, that's not inherently a bad thing. I just don't want that to come out on the people that don't deserve it, or like in the situations that, it doesn't warrant it. But like with myself, if I say I'm going to do something and then I tell someone else, my ego is now going to be on my side. Like, hey, dude, don't do that thing this week. Like, you're not doing that thing. And so like, there are ways to get all of your parts to be excited about what their roles are inside of you. But if you're constantly just hitting the buttons and fucking around finding out, you're not going to have time to actually even name your parts, let alone work with them, let alone actually come to a totally different reality in which your everyday life is psychedelic, because now you're able to manage your emotions. Like, let's talk about what psychedelic reality really is. Being able to manage your emotions, being able to respond rather than react, and be able to keep your peace no matter what is happening around you. Like those are, in my opinion, the true psychedelics that are from within, that all of these things, whether it be coaches, whether it be psychedelics, etc., to me, that's what they're all working towards. For me to become completely unfuckwithable from within, because it is an inside out revolution, like heaven is a place in earth, right? Like really inside of ourselves. And I think in order to do that and reach that point, we must be able to keep an equilibrium within, right? That's not to say bypass when we get frustrated, but not allow it to throw us off our game, And so, yeah, man, I love this conversation. It's so dope. A lot of good points.
Yeah, to bounce the ball back with you there on that last thread, you just mentioned what is most meaningful to me about this whole journey, about being unfuckwithable within. For me, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I want to be Buddha, or like I didn't get into yoga and meditating and plant medicines and all the esoteric things because I was like, I want to be the enlightened one. Straight up, I like life was hard for me internally. I used to have night terrors all the time. I used to be very fearful and anxious, and out of necessity, I started training martial arts unconsciously from a childhood age to learn how to handle myself and learn how to protect myself. And as I grew, I was like, oh, what's this yoga business? And I started exploring that. And unknowingly, I find myself on the path of healing, building resilience, spiritualizing the body, self-actualization, however people, being a God-fearing person, whatever somebody's framework is. I find that when life presents you with these paradoxes and challenges that are like, okay, jujitsu is not going to fix this one. Like my brain is having trouble comprehending this, and it's hard on my heart. To me, that's what spiritual development means to me now. It's like jujitsu, where it's helping me be more resilient, but in a new way where, oh, I can accommodate that. Oh, I can accommodate that. And I like to think about, when white belts come into the gym, at first they're very stiff and you're like, relax. And like, I used to even pet people and be like, I'm like 130 pounds. You're not going to get hurt with me. You're so safe. But you mentioned reprogramming. People have to first, they're programmed to be rigid and scared. And through unprogramming that, you can start to loosen up. And then after you've been training for a while, now you get how to flow. So when you can learn to just loosen up and flow more, and I have this little phrase I call it rolling with life. I'm really learning to be a martial artist of being human. And for me, it's to solve those deep problems. And the weird thing is, the more you dive in, the more that is presented. And I have found that you get more comfortable bearing it and rolling with it and flowing with it. But in jiu-jitsu, in psychology, and life, it's like there's always work. It's always uncertain. There's always something challenging at hand. And it seems like it just evolves and adapts. And this journey to me is just like you said, becoming more resilient and being able to be heart open through that process, so that it's not all survival. There's also creation, there's also love, there's also connection. And yeah, so I loved what you were saying there.
Yeah, like, what I want to remind everyone on, because I never want to, have people start getting anxious, like, oh my God, it's all work. It never stops being work. It's like, no, guys, I want to be very clear on this part. It gets fucking way more fun when you start connecting in this way, right? Not just with psychedelics, but with your entire life, right? It gets simpler. Now, simple isn't always easy, but it gets simpler. Because let's say if you react, you just apologize right away. It's a connection point and you move on with your life, right? Like, it gets simpler. Doesn't get easy. It's never easy to own up. Well, at least for me, it's never easy to own up when I've realized I've disappointed someone important to me. But at the same time, it gets simpler to recognize, like, hey, just because I admit I am wrong in this situation, or that I, said something out of turn, or that I would have liked a redo or a do-over with what I just said, actually means that I'm actually tapping into deeper strength. Because when you talk about leadership, when you talk about being a community leader, or like any of these types of things that so many of us want to do, create an impact in the world, etc., what kind of leader would you want to see? A leader that, is just like bullheaded and just, O'Doyle rulesing everyone and just the, never admitting when maybe they were out of turn? Or would you want a strong leader that's strong enough to say, hey, you know what? When I said that thing, I realized it could have been taken in this way, and I want to make sure this is accurate to what I was looking to portray here, right? Like that then gives everyone else permission to that's what leadership is. Leadership is not getting it right all the time. Embodiment is not getting it right all the time. It's being aware enough when you are out of alignment to accept it, acknowledge it, and empower other people to now do the same thing, right? And so, yeah, man, this is super fun. Dude, it's been amazing to have you back on the show. I feel like we got a whole day together, guys. We got Division Cast today. We had an amazing meeting with one of our business coaches, and now we get to do this podcast. So it's been 5 hours of me with Alex. It's been awesome. So Alex, where can people find you, connect with you? I know you're doing some one-on-one coaching too and things like that. Where can people find out more about that? Tell the people everything, bro. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, right on. Well, great riffing with you, bro. It's been a great day. Super fun conversation. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, connect with me at Alex Morningstar _ on Instagram. I'd love to connect with anybody. If anything from this show resonated with you, I always love hearing from people and making connections. And check out our work at highlyoptimized.me. We've got a lot of really beautiful stuff happening in the community. I'll leave it there. So Ryan, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Hell yeah, man. I can't wait till we do it in person soon. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in person before too long. It's been over a year, guys. We got to talk to each other every day through the interwebs, but yeah, too long, man. So we'll do another special Sasquatch edition up in your area in Washington. We'll dress as Sasquatch.
We'll have to go up to Mount Adams and look for some squatches for sure.
Yes, dude, it's squatch season. Well, guys, I hope wherever you are in the world, you are having the best day ever. You guys know the whole situation. If you guys love the show, we would love so much if you gave us a 5-star review. It helps us getting the show out to more and more people that can benefit from it. And for that, we are forever grateful. Thank you guys so much, and may the force be with you to infinity and beyond. Peace.